Hi, folks, and welcome to the second part of our series on the Introduction to Film Form. Here we're going to look at Rear Window just a bit. I hope you enjoyed the film, or at least found it interesting. We're going to think about it with respect to two things, the first of which is a refresher on that concept of film form we talked about last time. Remember that film form is simply the spatial and temporal arrangement of an artwork. It's the how something is put together as opposed to the what of what it depicts, right? It's the how the clip from The Shining made for the impression of creepiness. It wasn't the what of depicting a child riding a tricycle through a hotel. I want us to look at a sequence from Rear Window to think about this very question of form. A very simple sequence in which we watch Jeffries look out the window and make his own judgments based on the formal details of what he's seeing. And I want us to think about what kinds of inferences we can make about his own making of inferences, and what that has to do with the study of film form. So let's watch the clip.
Well, that's fine, Stella. Now, would you fix me a sandwich, please?
Yes, I will. And I'll spread a little common sense on the bread. Lisa's loaded to her fingertips with love for you. I got 2 words of advice for you. Marry her.
She pay you much?
Oh.
Well, if you want anything, just ring.
Window shopper.
Okay, so let's take a look at this clip. And I want to look at this clip in 2 distinct ways. The first is to ask what information is communicated through the aspects of form. Those would include performance, editing, framing, narrative positioning, things like that. The second question I'm going to ask is what kinds of themes or characterization might be communicated through form. But the first thing I want to do is to do something very simple, akin to our exercise with The Shining clip that we looked at, which was to say, how is something that seems self-evident, like creepiness, produced in The Shining clip? How, in this case, are basic aspects of narrative information being communicated? And what are those aspects of narrative communication, especially given that no words are uttered in the bulk of the sequence? So let's take a look. And I'm especially referring to the bulk of the sequence in which Jeffries is looking at this newlywed couple. Now, let's first look. He's curious about the newlywed couple because his look signifies as such. And I'll play it on silent as we narrate what's going on here. The couple seems clearly eager to share affection, but they are blocked or interrupted by the man leading them to the room. They embrace and they kiss, and we cut to Jeffries, who's looking pleased at the mere sight of 2 young people in such affection. They seem to be in love. Now, what's interesting here is that Jeffries' puzzlement suggests that he's confused. He doesn't know why the couple has left the room. That means he's going to keep looking in order to answer that question. Now, the couple has done something that makes Jeffries sigh with a sense of recognition. He seems to sit back and say, oh, now I understand, right? Some of you may understand what he's reacting to, some of you may not, but what we've just witnessed is a cultural symbol, a cultural practice of a husband and wife, newlyweds, the husband carrying the wife over the threshold of a doorway to signify the commencement of the beginnings of a marriage after a wedding. Now, what's interesting is that there's that recognition, and then there's this moment where something else happens, which is very telling. They kiss again. And for some reason, Jeffries doesn't seem as pleased with their love as he had before. Now, these little details might just wash over you as you're watching the film, but we have to ask, why are they there, right? No, they have nothing to do with the murder mystery. They have only things to do with Jeffries and who he is, but in fact, they give us a lot of information, right? In fact, one of the things that this film is about is not just about murder, it's about marriage. And Jeffries is signaling the fact that he's uncomfortable with these two people being in love within the confines of marriage, according to Jeffries' own biases against the institution of marriage. And then there's a fourth thing. When the couple closes the window, Jeffries starts to realize that he is in fact violating their privacy, which is acknowledged by his nurse. Now, what we just did is we performed a kind of basic interpretation of what was merely being communicated in the narrative simply through facial expressions, a pattern of cutting, that is editing, and the performances of the particular people across the way. But this is not just merely telling us narrative information, it's also telling us certain things that are deeper, according to the film, things like characterization, that is who Jeffries is and what he values. Right? One of those things was, of course, the fact that he is fearful of marriage because he believes that it hinges upon, or that it prevents his own freedom, which is kind of his own philosophy. And then we have this thing about theme, the theme of voyeurism, which is expressed at the end of the film, or at the end of the sequence, in which Jeffries feels self-conscious of the fact that he's been watching this very private affection between these two people. And then finally, if we want to take a leap, we can say that there's something about the cinematic medium going on here, which is that just like Jeffries is forming inferences based on what he's seeing, so too are we forming inferences based on what we are seeing. And in fact, we may feel a kind of shame, or at least a sense of, is this okay, when we're watching people on a movie screen, people for whom they cannot see us in return. And this kind of question is very much going on in Rear Window, especially when Grace Kelly's character says, tell me everything you saw and what you think it means. In other words, this film is not just an example of film form, it's also a kind of reflexive film about what it means as a spectator to glean information by making inferences about things that we can only see and hear but not participate in. That is, things on screen. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And I want to kind of segue into this question of interpretation, which is kind of what we've been doing a bit and reflecting upon what Grace Kelly's character says, tell me everything you saw, number one, and what you think it means, number two. That is, tell me everything you see formally and what you think it means, that is, interpret. So what would Susan Sontag say about this kind of thing? And I want to just take a moment to address this text that I asked you to read. It's a difficult text. I don't expect everyone to feel comfortable with their understanding of it. There's a lot of difficult terms being thrown around. There's a lot of name dropping. This is an academic kind of philosophical text about the nature of interpretation. And I want to draw a few things from it. And the first thing that I want to say about it is I don't want to say use this as a model or a guide for what goes on in this class. But I do want to say that it brings up a few important questions that are going to help us figure out what film analysis is and what it can be.